You stand on the brake pedal and you'll get a judder and the whole car will sort of shake.
You're watching MotoringBox, proudly supported by Century Batteries.
Welcome back to MotoringBox. I'm Sean McKellar and this is my Ford SZ Territory. Now we are dealing with the brakes today because these things, along with Falcons, are very well known for warping their brake rotors. You stand on the brake pedal at anything beyond 60 k's an hour and you'll get a judder and the whole car will sort of shake as you slow down. Now, from my experience, there are two reasons why this can happen. The first one is the brake calipers get to an age where they start to stick, and that's because the pistons in the brake caliper are phenolic, if I'm pronouncing that right. They begin to sort of pit and corrode, and they don't move as freely in the brake caliper as they normally would. So they start to bind and the caliper doesn't release the pads as far back from the rotor as it should. The pads rub on the rotor overheats, the rotor warps. That's what happens. So that is the first reason. It's more common on older vehicles like the AU and probably BABF. But on a newer vehicle like this 2013 SZ, I reckon it's the brake booster, because what can happen is it can seemingly fall out of adjustment. And what happens is you'll notice, if it's anything like this, as soon as you put your foot on the brake, the car starts braking immediately. There's no dead zone or no play there. The brakes, the pads are right there on the rotor. And as soon as you put even the slightest amount of pressure on that pedal, the car starts braking. The pads are simply too close to the rotor. They're probably dragging all the time. They overheat the rotor warps, you get pulsing through your pedal again. So we're going to do that first. After we adjust that brake booster master cylinder, I'm also going to throw some new rotors, new pads on this thing, so everything is going to be brand new. Right, let's do that right now. Now, pretty much with any Falcon or Territory, the coolant bottle, or the overflow bottle, is going to be in the way. So we need to get that out. 2 bolts, and it should just pull out and we can sort of put it down here out of the way. Perfect. Just need to sit that somewhere where it's comfy. Does not appear to be leaking, so that's good. So what we need to do now, there is a nut here and another nut on that side. We need to undo both of those, and then this whole master cylinder arrangement here on the front is going to slide out. So the overflow bottle had 10mm bolts. This has 12mm nuts. So this will make a bit more sense when I get this off. I'll explain to you exactly why we need to be doing this operation in the first place. So these brake lines are a little bit flexible, but we just need to pull it away. You'll hear the vacuum release. That'll give us a bit more movement. Might just remove that electrical connector as well, because that's stopping us. Great. On this SZ Territory, when I took the master cylinder out, there was a little rubber seal which was found hanging here on the rod. So have a look inside your brake booster on this rod, and also feel down into the bottom of the brake booster here, and if there is a seal, pull it out and stick it back onto your master cylinder in this spot right here. With the seal back in place, we can turn our attention back to the adjustment rod. So what we need to do is hold this rod with a pair of pliers or vice grips in this location right here. We then need to get our 7mm socket and put it onto the nut located here on the end of the rod. And now we need to discuss what this adjustment actually does. So if you think about the relation of your brake pedal to the actual brake function, you would hope that once you start pressing the pedal, soon after the brakes would start to engage and you would reach maximum braking before the pedal hits the floor. So what I believe is happening here is that the brakes are adjusted a little bit too strongly, and that there is actually some braking taking place when the pedal is not being pressed. So by turning this nut clockwise, you are winding out the brakes and you are moving the brake point further away from the start of the pedal. The same is true if you went anti-clockwise. It would actually make the brakes stronger than what they were previously. So in this situation where the brakes are sticking ever so slightly, we need to turn this nut clockwise approximately a quarter of a turn. And that's it. So with the rod adjustment done, we can now put all this back together, making sure to plug this connector back in. Brakes are very important. You don't want to be adjusting this thing too far, otherwise your pedal's going to go to the floor. You're not going to get maximum braking. So yes, do it at your own risk. That is all back together. Put our overflow bottle back and we're done. All right, with the brake booster adjustment done, we can move on to replacing the rotors and the pads. Now, as I mentioned, you could get your existing rotors skimmed. That it's time, it's a bit of money as well. It'd be a lot cheaper than replacing these, but I've replaced brakes on my other cars already. I really think it's worthwhile. Having good brakes on your car, nice and smooth, makes a huge difference to the driving pleasure, especially on a daily driver like this. So I've gone for a kit off eBay. This was about $540 odd. It's a set of BCP brake rotors, never heard of them, but they are sort of slotted and dimpled. I think they look all right. And they also came with a set of general CT Bendix brake pads as well. These are kind of the stock standard grade of brake pad. They're not a performance pad or anything. Daily driven car, doesn't matter. So yeah, we've got rotors front and back, pads front and back. Pretty good kit by the look of it. So yeah, let's get these slapped on the car, see how it goes. Can't really see anything suspicious looking about it. They always look smooth. You can't really see the warp to the naked eye, you know, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. The existing pads actually have a bit of meat on them still. You can't put new rotors with old pads, you've got to replace them all. This caliper's got to be wedged somewhere so it can't just hang off the brake line. Pull that one off. Now when the new rotor goes on, this is something I made a mistake with because it's really hard to film and concentrate at the same time. But when you put your new rotors on, if they've got slots on them, you need to make it so that when the rotor goes forwards, that the slot is kind of going back like that. If they're the other way, sort of sloping forwards, they're wrong. All right, we're going for speed this time, so let's get the caliper back on, slot the pads in, and then we'll be done. Before the new pads go in, it's often a good idea to push the pistons back, so I usually just put an old brake pad in there and use a very cheap G-clamp that I got from Bunnings, just to push each one in. Yeah, I'm kind of doing this job with the hope that these calipers are fine and they don't need rebuilding. If we do all of this and they start to warp again, then yeah, these little pistons here will be the culprit. Perfect. And then once you've applied pressure, yeah, it's spinning without dragging. Obviously that'll change once the car and the brakes start being used, but looks good. That took me about 10 minutes and yeah, hopefully they perform brilliantly. Let's do the other side. Alright guys, fronts are done. Looking pretty good. Now, truth be told, a few days have passed. I've actually been driving this car and I have to say it has solved the brake warping shutter issue. This car now brakes beautifully smooth. Now this kind of makes sense because the front brakes do the majority of the braking on a car, and if you have this problem, you can pretty much just do the front rotors and pads and you'll be set. So I did actually jump in and put an additional quarter turn, clockwise quarter turn on the master cylinder rod adjuster. Just because it did feel like the brakes were coming on just a little bit too early again. Pad thickness might have something to do with it, I'm not really sure. But yeah, so in full on this car, I did a half turn clockwise on the rod. The brakes seem to be wearing really well. They're beautifully smooth. I've actually put a couple of 100 kilometers on them already. With the rears, we could probably leave them alone, but look, I've got the parts. I may as well do it. It's a little bit more tricky because you've got a handbrake to deal with, but yeah, let's give it a shot, shall we? Now, usually with rear rotors, you have to loosen the handbrake. So we'll see how we go with that. I dare say we will need to. So once you've taken that little cap off, you just have to locate the little cog. There it is. So I will try and keep count of the amount of times I spin it. 2, 6, 7, 8. There we go. So now that this is off, you can have a little look under here at the cog. There she is right there. So I spun that one upwards 8 times. We just need to make sure we spin that back once the new rotor goes on. Very nice. All right, so we just need to spin that thing 8 times downwards now. Tell you what, these pads are a lot thinner than the front. So it's probably had front brakes at some point, but not rears. All right, that feels pretty good to me. Right, both wheels are locked with the handbrake and without. Got a bit of friction from the pads there, but that should sort itself out. Other side sounds good too. All right guys, I think we are done. Brakes are never a fun job, but yeah, we've got this in a spot now where once we start driving it, she should be pretty good. So let's go out on the road now and test her out. So how do you test whether your brake upgrade and brake booster adjustment is actually successful? Well, for a start, you should have very smooth brakes. That's how this car is right now. It's done a couple of trips to the Gold Coast on its new rotors and pads. So smooth. Even braking from 110 on the highway, awesome. It's the most satisfying thing you can do maintenance-wise to a car. But the more proper way to test it is to do a highway run like I just did, try and get off the highway and try and slow down without using your brakes, which is what I've done now. I've just done a couple of Ks on the Ipswich motorway, and you can sort of go onto a back road, cycle back through the gears, or drop it back to third, back to second. We'll see if we can cruise in here without using the brakes. Perfect. And this is really checking the brake temperature. So we've just done a highway cruise. The brakes should be nice and cool. If there's any rubbing or any friction there, you know, any binding, if the calipers are touching the rotor and it's generating heat and they're going to warp in the future, well, you would expect that that rotor and that wheel would be quite hot after doing, you know, 100 k's an hour for at least a couple of minutes. So we still haven't braked. Back to first. Okay. And back to neutral. There we go. That's a masterclass on how to do this test. Okay, let's jump out and have a look. Right, so here's the test, guys. Apart from having smooth brakes, which we've got, we need to do the temperature test. So don't touch the rotor, because chances are it could be scalding hot. But if you've got a sticking brake issue, simply put your hand on the face of the wheel, and that's going to tell you if there's a problem or not. So this one, it's probably a couple of degrees above body temperature. I would say about 40 degrees. Not a problem. Brakes get really hot even under moderate loads. The back one, yeah, about the same, probably about 40 degrees. If you've got a sticking caliper and the brakes are dragging, chances are even after a couple of kilometers of driving on the highway, your wheels and brakes would be way too hot to touch. These, on the other hand, perfect. So if, like me, and all 4 of your wheels are nice and cool, there's no heat being generated there, chances are you've fixed your problem. But if any one of your wheels is way too hot, even after just a cruise like that, you've still got a sticking brake problem. You can try and adjust the master cylinder brake booster rod there a bit more, but if the pedal feels okay, like it feels like it's in the right spot, that's probably not the problem. It's probably the calipers, especially on E-Series Falcons, AU, B-Series. But yes, do remember that brake booster adjustment. Do that first. Before you troubleshoot anything further. A lot of people don't know about it, and yeah, it is something to keep in mind and remember. So that's it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it to be enjoyable or educational, hit the thumbs up, give me a subscribe. You know you want to. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.